Good morning mga ka-webinar. Welcome to another set of session or another week of transitioning the education ecosystem to the new normal webinar series handog sa inyo ng Commission on Higher Education Regional Office 1. And this week, we will be discussing common online platforms that you can use to facilitate teaching and learning in this new normal. Today, we will be discussing GSuite sessions. And before we start our session, let us feel the presence of the Lord. To lead us to prayer, let us all welcome Dr. Juan Primitivo Petrola, Education Supervisor 2.
Shall we bow down our heads in prayer? Almighty Father, source of all that is good, we praise, glorify, and thank you for the gift of life, blessings, and graces, which we continuously receive from you despite our unworthiness. We gather once again for our webinar series under your inspiration. Send, O Lord, your Holy Spirit upon us, that this webinar be a success for your greater glory. As we open our ears and minds to the intellectual sharing and expertise of our resource speaker, open our hearts to the fire of your love and help us extend our hands to our brothers and sisters who need our help and assistance, especially those affected by the pandemic. As we prepare our schools to brace the challenges of the new normal, we humbly ask you to make peace, love, unity, and service as our ever new and enduring normal to the way we live, so that others may see you in us and us in you. Thank you, Lord, for the gift of technology. May we use it to benefit society, serve humanity, uplift our community, and strengthen our families. We ask your forgiveness for abusing this gift to harm or discredit others. For all that was, is, and will be, thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So good morning once again. And since we are celebrating our 26th year as a true blue Chedan, yes, 26 years na po ang Commission on Higher Education. So happy anniversary, Ched. Palakpakan naman natin yan. Yay! And And as Ched continues to thrive amid this crisis, nagpapasalamat po kami sa 3,977 followers in Facebook and 1,049 subscribers sa YouTube channel. Last week webinar session, we have accumulated 30,000 views po all over the Philippines and all over the world. Maraming salamat po. And Shuri, together, hashtag we learn as one. And to inspire us today, let us hear from our very young but very dynamic and competent OIC Director, Dr. Rogelio T. Galera Jr.
They build the spirit. We oftentimes hear the cliche, that's the spirit. But what does it imply, especially for us in the education sector? The phrase tells us that things are doing well and things are working right. Therefore, using our passion and energy for the cause of education and in embracing the demands of the new normal as invitations for innovation and relevance, we can keep our tracks right and uplift our spirits to keep soaring high amidst the raging winds. This year, we are celebrating the 26th founding anniversary of the Commission on Higher Education. For a quarter and a year of a century, we have seen how the quality delivery of tertiary education in the country has evolved. The years that went by reflect the commitment of the Commission to always persevere and make higher education a potent tool for social transformation. Our 26th year as an agency was confronted by the unprecedented test of our resilience and coping strategies due to the COVID 19 pandemic. As the whole world battles this plague, CHED continues to thrive and flourish by creating necessary reforms and preparation for flexible learning as a new normal in higher education, equipped with the skills required for the fourth industrial revolution. We in CHED Region 1 stand firm in our vow to be your partners in ensuring that tertiary education is a sure answer in providing a society with professionals, experts, and specialists who make positive change possible. As we continue with this week's sessions, may you keep that passion and energy burning so that the Spirit will be able to continue fulfill its mission as educators of the 21st century. Happy and meaningful 26-year anniversary to all of us.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Galera. At makakaasa po kayo na patuloy kaming tutulong sa inyo tungo sa pang-unlad ng edukasyon. And now, we are blessed to have with us a very empowered woman in technology. And to introduce her, may I share this slide to you? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Miss Aileen Apolo de Jesus is the Senior Program Manager in the Google for Education team in Asia Pacific. She manages the education programs and ecosystem development across Asia Pacific. Her program's work includes driving educator and community development groups through Google for Education programs and the Google Educator groups. She has authored the initial teacher education program, which drives PD development for pre-service teachers. She is also mentoring international program managers in the Google for Education team. She has also managed the Google Developer Groups, Google Business Groups, and the Google Student Ambassador Program. She was previously the country representative for the Philippines for 5 years. She also led the Philippines Crisis Response Program and championed the map maker efforts in the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. She has degrees in Masters in Business Administration, Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, and Bachelor of Science in Legal Management from De La Salle University. In her spare time, she blogs, she quilts, cooks, and bakes delicious cupcakes. And live from Singapore, mga ka-webinar, let us all welcome Miss Aileen Apolo de Jesus.
Thank you for the great introduction, Lynette. And good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me today to share about some of the distance learning strategies we have at Google for Education. So, my name is Aileen Apolo de Jesus. I've been working for Google for about almost 14 years now. And I must say, the only reason why that I'm here today in this role working for Google is mainly because of my teachers and my professors. So, actually, I'm very nervous today because my thesis mentor from college, Miss Cherry, is watching today. So, hi, Miss Cherry, and I hope everybody picks up something today as I go through my slides. So, let me share my screen so we can go through. So, I would encourage everybody to take notes so that you can read up more about what I'll be teaching today. And of course, for easy access, please go visit teachfromhome.google. That's where we have a lot of our distance learning resources for you to learn more how to go about this thing today. So certainly we've been put in a situation that's very different. And none of us have probably gone through this ever in our lifetime. And as Lynette mentioned earlier, and as the director said, the new normal is certainly something that we would need to adjust to. So today, what I'll be sharing are some of the things that you can do in your own classrooms as you adjust and see how best to teach your students, because at the end of the day, and I appreciate everybody who's come to attend this webinar, at the end of the day, you guys are doing this learning new things mainly for your students. And that's why I always show my appreciation to my teachers and all the professors who taught me throughout the many years that I was studying, because it was them who brought out the best in me. And later I'll be sharing some anecdotes in between, so you could see like using technology, how does it actually also affect a student. So today there are some things I'll be going through so that you can learn some practical things as you bring them to your classroom. So for the first one, we're going to talk about like how do you increase opportunities for engagement. So Google for Education certainly has a number of things that you can use. Our main platform is called GSuite for Education. And if you're part of Chat, your email that you're using has been using G Suite for Education for many, many years. I've actually lost count when we deployed G Suite for Education for CHED. I think it's about 8 years now. So, like, do utilize your account to study and learn more, why you can do things to collaborate with your colleagues, with other people within CHED, how to use it, and check if your school or university or college is also using G Suite for Education. Okay, so that would be the main thing that we'll be going through today. Okay, so the first thing, as you may have probably heard, we have announced that, like, you can use Google Meets. We've made this free, like even for your consumer accounts, your Gmail accounts. But if you're using G Suite for Education, or if by any chance you're a business who's using G Suite for Enterprise, we've made the premium features of Google Meets free for use for everybody using G Suite for Education until September 30, 2020. So what does Google Meets does? It's essentially your video conferencing tool that you can use to reach out to your students for maybe live sessions that you want to do. And what you could actually find on it is you could record the videos that you do via Google Meets until September 30, 2020. And what it does is, for now, you can have up to about 250 participants in your Google Meets call. But when it reverts to the free version, you could have up to 100 participants, which still fits your regular classroom in the Philippines, right? But if, for example, you'd like to host larger, meetings or like live streams within your domain, you could have up to 100,000 participants if you use the Google Meets premium feature. So you could actually broadcast live school events across your domain. But, like, it's very easy to use because at least you can meet all your students in one go. And we've recently announced also that you could easily create a Meets instance from your Google Classroom. So for those who have been using Google Classroom, or you'd like to try out using Google Classroom, from Google Classroom itself, you could actually already create a unique Meet link that you can send to your students. Or very simply, if your students are all in a Google Groups, you can just add the Google Groups link and then send that out for the Meets link. And much easier also, you can create your Meets link using Google Calendar. So when Lynette sent me yesterday the StreamYard link, I just put it on my Google Calendar. So I just went to my calendar this morning, clicked on it, and here I am in your webinar. But if you're using Google Meets, it's essentially the same thing. Okay, so um, probably some of you or most of you have already tried using Google Docs. It's the most amazing thing that was ever invented from my point of view, because what it does is you can make your documents, your slides, or even your spreadsheets collaborative, which means you can, like, edit the document in real time together with your students or with your colleagues. So think about, like, in my generation, when we were doing our thesis, we were forced to actually stay overnight in each other's places. So my thesis mate, who lived like very far away from me, I lived in Parañaque. My thesis mate lived in Valenzuela. He had to travel, like, do his part of the paper in his home, and then he would travel all the way to my place um, in the wee hours of the morning so that we can put together our thesis. But that gone are the days that you need to do that one, and you can keep your students safe, and parents won't need to like worry about having their children stay overnight, because Google Docs could actually be interactive, and you can collaborate directly on the document. So plan na overnight. Plus, in our situation right now, it's very hard to actually, go to each other's homes. Okay. And if you're doing a presentation, something that you can actually turn on is what we call slides audience Q&A. So from your presentation, you could actually turn this on and allow students, to submit their questions already as you do your lesson. So let's say, for example, you're doing a Google Meets with your students, and like as you're doing your lecture, have them already start submitting their questions, and then you can go through the questions in the end of your lecture. So, and like you can also opt to display those questions so students can see and react, to those questions. Okay. So one thing that we advise also is, if you have 30 minutes of instructional content, break it down into smaller chunks. So, but that's not what we're doing today, because I'm doing a straight lecture for you. But if you're doing, like, let's say, a Google Meets lecture for your students, we strongly suggest you break it down to 5-minute mini lessons. And then, because you need to give time for your students to digest the material, and do some activities in between, so that it's easier for them to digest things as you go through your lesson. And another tip that we have is for you to always pause often to check understanding. So you could utilize Google Forms, quizzes to run, like, some diagnostic exam, or like a pop quiz in between your lesson. And usually when you use this one, or like use some of the tools, it allows you to check attendance. Because of course, like, it's very hard to count like like your students when they join the Google Meets. But through this, like, quick assessments, you could actually already check attendance of your students, and also see how they're actually progressing as they go through the material that you're presenting to them. Another one to continue engagement with your students is to integrate hands-on activities. So, we all know that the students today, they have very short attention spans. So, you need to integrate more hands-on activities to keep them, focused on you, to keep their attention also. And because also, and this I learned, personally with my son, I realize, like, kids today, they learn very differently from how my generation learned. So I come from that generation where majority of my schooling was actually done offline. We had computer activities back then, but then, like, it was still majority using books, classroom teaching. There wasn't really that much integration into online. It was only during, when I was taking my masterals, when one of my professors thought it would be a great idea to continue discussion via Yahoo groups. So we were just simply emailing each other. But that was the time that my professor actually discovered that I had some talent. So because of the discussions that we were doing online, he said, like, "Oh, you actually have very good opinions." And from that time, he took me on, and, like, developed me further as a student. Okay. So A second point to this is to frequently assess student learning, because like things are very different. Like when you're teaching in class, you could physically see your student, you could simply like walk over to your student and check also how they're doing. But when you're doing things online, it's a very different matter. So how do you actually assess whether your students are actually learning, right? So, one of the tools that we have at Google for Education is Google Forms. So, with Google Forms, you could actually just throw out pop quizzes. You could actually run, um, like exams on it as well. If you're, in fact, using a Chromebook, you could actually lock the Chromebook to your exam. So we have actually customers in other countries where they actually do those like larger exam, um, and they use Chromebooks and then lock it to that exam so that the students won't be able to access anything else except the exam. So, but that's for larger national exams. But for your class, you could just simply run some quizzes, some like activities that you can run with your students using Google Forms. So, and even very simply, you could just throw out some discussion starters for your students by like usually usually at the beginning of the school year, people ask you, what did you do for your vacation? So, like when you come back from school, but let's say you're not going to do face to face lectures immediately with your students, you could actually run a simple form and ask your students, how was your time during your long vacation? And students can share probably what they have been doing to cope with the situation that we are all in today. And as I mentioned earlier, as you do your lecture, you could, turn on slides Q&A so that your students can interact and, submit their questions as it pops in their head. So, like for me, I do this often. I just write it down, or whenever we have global team meetings, they turn this on for us also, and we submit our questions for the person speaking to everybody. And for those who are using Google Classroom, like Google Classroom is a really great way you can do to manage your class. So if you're a teacher and you're managing, let's say, 3 to 5 classes, you could actually put each class in its own Google Classroom. And this is where you can line up all the content and all the material that you want to teach your students. And part of Google Classroom, there is a stream there where you could put in some questions and encourage your students to, discuss. If I was still taking my masters and I had that professor teaching, he'd probably use this because he thought, like engaging students online would be good, to further the discussion versus just doing it in class. And let's all admit it, there's a huge percentage of us, including me, who never really liked class recitation. So that was why when my professor like did that instance of Yahoo groups for our class way back, I was so participative. Like I would get into like debates with my classmates via that platform, mainly because I write better than I speak. So, and this one I'm doing today took many years of practice to get comfortable with. And yeah, but Google Classroom is a good way for you to also discover your students who are usually quiet in class. They probably have something at the back of their mind going as you go through it. All right. And one thing about Google Classroom is it makes it easier for you to give assignments. So you could, put in links, like links to YouTube videos or even links to articles. You could upload files also that you want your students to go through. So basically, you can give homework to your students using Google Classroom. And if, for example, you'd like your students to, let's say, fill out a template, when you put it on Google Classroom, it will automatically the template for each and every student that you have, which saves you a lot of time as teachers. So I actually have, teachers and professors in many schools. What they do is they really spend, time developing their Google Classroom and putting things there. Because the next year, when you do the same lecture, then you can simply just, make a copy of that Google Classroom, and it saves you a lot of time. And then you can just tweak it if there's something new you want to put in your Google Classroom. Okay, so the question probably in everybody's mind is like, but internet in the Philippines is, it's not really as good, right? And that's the reality of things. And later on, I'll be discussing also how you can utilize our tools when you're in a situation where you can't be online all the time. But, like Hangouts Meet or Google Meets, as we call it now, is something that you can use, not necessarily every day, but you can use this to be able to engage your students. So what you can do is, like, together with your school admin, like if you have a G Suite for Education account, you can already, like, one, you need to make sure all your students have accounts using G Suite for Education from your school. And then you can create your groups so that it's easy for you to send out invitations for your Google Meets class. So I strongly suggest that when you send your invitations for your students, just simply use Google Calendar and then drop your students an email so that they can join your Hangouts Meet sessions at the appropriate time. And I encourage you to also try using the recording function so that when your students aren't able to join your lecture in real time or live, then they could just refer back to the link of the recording of the session. Okay, so something that we've integrated also in Google Meets is a means for closed captioning. So what does this mean? This means that, let's say you're doing the lecture in English, but you're not, an English speaker and prefer to learn in another language, you could actually turn on and learn in your language. So, like, a couple of months back, when I started doing our response for the COVID-19 issue, uh, one of the earlier things that I had to do was figure out how do I actually, provide training for our teachers in Taiwan and Hong Kong. And majority of our resources are actually in English. I didn't really have that much resources available in Chinese and much less in Cantonese, because in Taiwan they speak Mandarin, and in Hong Kong they speak Cantonese. So what I had to think quickly about was, one, where do I get the resources? And two, how do I actually do it? to be able to, like train more teachers and reach more teachers. Luckily, we have a very active Google Educator groups in those countries. So I got help from them. And what we did was we came out with a series of webinars uh, where they taught, their co-teachers how best to use all these tools for their classroom. And remember, like, Taiwan and Hong Kong, uh, they were one of the countries that had responded to the pandemic really, really early. And Hong Kong, most of their schools had been closed for a couple of months already because of the political situation there. So certainly, like, the tools that we have used them, and we had used all these tools to also help, teachers learn quickly how to use these things. And what happened basically was, there were some resources from other countries that they wanted to learn. So, like, when I had to do the same for Korea, my biggest problem is it's a new country. We do have Google Educator groups, but there were teachers who couldn't wait, for the webinar series that we run there. So the teacher said, it's not an issue. We could actually watch the videos from Taiwan, Hong Kong, or even Japan just by turning on the subtitles at the bottom, and we can learn. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you could actually record your Google Meets lecture. So it's important to record it. Why? Because it will be able to allow you to actually provide access for your students who could not log in real time. So, and like aside from that, it also allows students to review concepts a second chance, to experience your lesson. So, like for me right now, I've been trying to learn a lot of new things. And for me, it's very easy to just go back to the video, like and rewind and relearn the concept that I missed during the lesson that I was going through. Another thing that we strongly suggest you do is to also put in appointment slots. So, if you're a professor, regularly you are required to actually have appointment slots where students can just, come to you, ask you questions, and, you hold what we call office hours. And what we suggest you do is, like a lot time in your calendar for office hours, not only for your students, but also for parents, so that you can, have this good discussions and allow students and parents to ask questions from you as a professor or as a teacher. Okay. So part number 4 is we suggest you include social emotional learning in your design. So this is something that sometimes we overlook. But like as we all know, the situation that we are in is very different. And like you need to cope. Even for us, we've been given like like suggestions on how we can cope better. I've been working from home for more than 2 months now, and I must say it's like it's really very difficult, for me. Because at least I'm not alone. I have my husband at home, but my son is very far away from me. But, and this is the reason why we also suggest you should include that point in your daily routines also. So one of the things that you can do is to actually create, Google Forms and just ask your students to check in what their mood is for that specific day. So in other countries, even like for example in Japan, I know their teachers are actually required to call each and every student they have every single day to check how they are doing. But like it's not normal. We don't really call each other. So you could simply just have and create, a Google form and have your students check in what their mood is. So here's a sample of a Google form that you can use and just have your students check. And when you actually create your response sheet, you could already see which students actually would like to have a teacher conference with you, and you could see how they are feeling, for that specific day, and you could continue discussion. So like I remember, like, in school we used to have guidance counselors, and that was the purpose of it. But as a teacher, of course, it's important for you to look after your students also and check, what their mood is. Another thing that you can do is encourage your students to do some personal journaling. So I've been actually doing this since January 1 this year. So, because I took a break from work, I've been working 13 years straight at Google without taking a break. And so last year I decided to take a break during Christmas. I took off for about 2 months. And I thought, why not blog again? So as of January 1, I've been blogging every single day. And I must say it's been helping me resolve some of the things that I've been struggling with, coping in this current situation that you're in. So the students, you don't need to have them share the blog with you. They could keep it for themselves, but if they're comfortable, then they can invite you or their parents to be a reader. I used to do this for my class when I was teaching at LaSalle way back. I was teaching a communications class, and what I wanted my students to learn was the value of, continuously writing. Because when you're in comms, you have no choice but to write almost every single day. So I had them create their own blogs and journal something new that they would learn every single week. And I would actually check their blogs weekly because I wanted to introduce that value of writing to them. Right? Point number 5 is think beyond the clock. So you're probably used to doing your lectures every single day from a certain period of time for a certain class. But, like this gives you the opportunity to actually think beyond the clock, or like think beyond the box. So, like, one of the things you could probably shift about the way you teach is to do project based learning within your classroom. So before you even start a class, and I know this is how you create your lesson plans, you have a goal that you define on what you want your students to learn for that day. And then you think about, like, okay, so how do I get my students to reach that goal? So when you think about project based learning in the classroom, it's very similar. You just have to be a bit more creative about how you could actually, like, create more exciting stuff for your students as they do collaborations online through, the Google for Education platform. So one of the things you could actually do is you could create a choose your own adventure using Google Classroom. I was certainly enamored by like choose your own adventure books. I think I was in grade school when that series of books started to come out, and it was really fun for me. And as a student, this is something that they should also experience. So if you're teaching a specific lesson, you could actually choose, the choose your own adventure means for your students to learn. And you could actually set this up on Google Classroom, because on Google Classroom you can like set things and have them choose which path they'd like to go through. And I'm sure your students are going to go back and choose the other path also, so that they can learn more from you. Okay? So, something that you can do also is, what if, English is a second language for students? In the Philippines, we're quite lucky because we try to teach all students how to speak in English. It's um, like, one of our highlights as, Filipinos. They always tell me, Filipinos speak English so well. And I cannot say that I'm the best English speaker. I have a lot more colleagues who speak English better than me. But, you can do this and use English as a closed caption for your students. And you can also use the translate feature in Google Docs when sharing with families. I tell you, like, the Google Translate, feature is something that's very important. Like, I think it was in late 2018 when I had the opportunity to visit some of the LaSalle brothers in Rome. And my lecture for them, part of it was to teach them how to use Google Translate. Because when I did my lecture, we found out that the brothers who were attending spoke 5 different languages. So during my lecture, they actually had translators at the back, and they wore these headsets to listen to the live translation being done by the translators. But I did an activity for them. I opened a Google Doc and had them, like, I asked a question for them and had them submit their thoughts in their own language. Because they told me one of the biggest struggles they had was communicating with each other, because they did not speak one language across everybody. So I said, like, that's easy. Let's do this activity. I put together a Google Doc, ask a question for them. They answered in many different languages. And then, like, I had it, like, live on screen. And then I told them, okay, what language do you want to read this document in? And then I think they chose, I think, Spanish. And so I just, clicked a switch and used Google Translate to translate the whole document to Spanish. So the brothers are like, wow, this is amazing. This is super useful for us. And they actually didn't want me to go home anymore and wanted to adopt me. But I said, no, my boss is with me here. I need to go back to Singapore. So that's something that you can use, because at Google, when we create things, we try to make things and make sure that things are interoperable with each other. Okay. So, point number 6, distance learning without home internet access. So, I would think everybody is sitting up now and, excited to listen to the next few slides, because this is a huge concern that everybody has, not only in the Philippines, but across the region and across the world. So, I mentioned earlier that it would be very useful for you to actually record your lectures. You don't even need to have a live Google Meets session. You could just record your lesson and then upload it to Google Drive, so that your students can access, your lesson if you want to do it as a video, when they actually gain access to Wi-Fi. Okay, and then this allows them to also download the recordings and watch from home, or they can go to an internet cafe and also access the recordings that you make for your lectures. So it's not necessary for you to like do live Google Meets all the time with your students. You can just set it up for them to access when they actually have Wi-Fi. And of course, you need to take into consideration that if you're giving them homework, you need to give them enough time to complete their homework for you. Another thing that you can do is like on Google Drive, those documents that you create, it may be docs, it may be slides, it may be spreadsheet, you could actually like upload it, like put it on your Google Drive, share it to your students. And then as a student, when you have access to internet, you could turn on offline slides. So as a teacher, what you need to do is make sure you teach your students how to enable offline slides, so that after, let's say, going to like a place with Wi-Fi, they could switch on offline slides so that when they go home, they could still access the slides or the doc. And then they could, if you want them to do something, they could, like make it available offline. And then when they're back in a place where there's Wi-Fi, it will just automatically sync back to their account. And then you can view the content that they actually create. So something that you can do is you could actually pre-record lessons and share it through Google Drive. So you could use just your phone, or you could use your computer, or you can use a camera even, and then upload those lessons on Google Drive. And then you can share that file with your students or put it on Google Classroom so that the students can access it and download the file before they leave school or before they leave the place where there is Wi-Fi access. All right. Number 7, communicate your plan with families. So there's always value in providing, information for families, because I think it's very important to also support parents, because especially for those teaching much younger students, your parents need to support them and make sure that they actually create all the homework that they have been assigned to do. So it's important, for schools, universities, or colleges to have, a page where families, guardians can go to understand, like, okay, what's happening to the learning of my child. And they can create Google Sites. They can create Google Sites to be able to communicate information for parents. And you can also create, like, ask the parents to submit their email addresses, and you can create Google groups to be able to send announcements to parents and guardians. And then finally, and as I mentioned earlier, it would be really amazing if you can give time for an office hour that you can provide for parents who can join and attend your office hours. Okay. All right. So with Google Sites, something that you can do, and like for me personally, I absolutely love using Google Sites. I even have a Google Sites for my home, because this is where I put a lot of information for my family. Because in case I'm so busy, at least they have a place they can go to. We even have like a spreadsheet that's embedded there listing out all the delivery places that we can get food from. Or you could actually also embed a calendar on Google Sites to put in, the activities that you're having, either just for your class or for the whole school. And this is where you can share helpful resources to people also. And Google Sites is very easy to use. You could actually create your school website using Google Site. And yeah, sometimes on the side when I have other activities, I create Google Site. I've created Google Site as the web page of our parish actually back in Manila. So another thing that you can use, of course, there's Google Group. You can create a Google Group for your class, and you can create a Google Group separate for families, right? And you can stay in touch with them throughout the closure. Something that I personally like using, and I use this for my different communities or like different groups I work with across Google, is Google Meets. So I usually create those chat groups and then we just chat away. So like last year when we had the Google Innovator Academy. So for that cohort, we put in all the 36 teachers who got accepted to the Innovator Academy and all the mentors. And that's how they initially like interacted with each other. And that group, it continues to be active even though it's been 7 months or actually 8 months now since we had the Innovator Academy. So Google Groups or Google Meets chat is something that you can use to keep in touch with people. And I do this for my team also because I'd like to keep tabs on them to see like if they're also well. And of course on the side, pwede rin siya pang chismis. Diba? Okay, so I mentioned earlier, and we encourage that you actually use Google Meet for your office hours. So you can slot this in into your Google Calendar and then share the link. If you put the parents on the Google group, share the link to parents and then just allow the parents to come in, to have a meeting with you. Or separately, if you'd like parents to allot 10 minutes, you could also share a spreadsheet and have them fill out what time they'd actually want to come into the appointment. And then you can just send individual calendar invites for that one, or just tell them, okay, like come at the appointed time and join this Google Meet link. So like interacting and engaging with parents and guardians is something that's important so that you could give feedback about how their child is doing in your class. Okay. And lastly, point number 8 is other things that you should consider. And some of these items are, appropriately to be known by principals or like head teachers or deans even. So like with this pandemic, something that you need to think about is like how does the setup affect your teachers moving forward. So if you own a school, you need to think about like, okay, if for example we're forced to just do online lessons for the meantime or like do remote learning, how does this affect the contract of my teachers? So like I think a lot of companies also are doing adjustments on how things are being done. So luckily us at Google, because all our stuff is online, we've been able to work seamlessly at home. So I've been working even longer hours the last 2.5 months. So that's something that you need to consider. And something that you could do is also, make modifications on how you do things. G Suite for Education is quite easy to, deploy. If you'd like to deploy this for your university or college, then, like, I strongly suggest you get in touch with CHED to help you, like, do a deployment. You just simply need your own school domain and then sign up online for G Suite for Education. If you have an IT administrator for your school, they should be able to do this quite fast. And Chad could let me know if there's any like account that needs to be expedited approval for. And then on the other hand, if you're thinking about like uh, using a device that's light, that's easy, and that's inexpensive, we have what you call Google Chromebooks. So the beauty of Chromebooks is, within less than 10 seconds, you're actually online already. Or if, for example, you're going to just access the offline docs that you have saved, then very easy to do. Usually we have contests at home on who can get online the fastest. Usually I win because my son like took up animation, so he's been using another type of device, and my husband is a developer also, so they have other needs. But for me, like since I started using Chromebooks more than 3 years ago, I just set aside all the other devices that I had and have been using Chromebooks. But the beauty of using Chromebooks for schools is like when you purchase it, you need to also purchase the Chrome Education license. So the Chrome Education license allows a school or a university to enforce more than 200 policies on the Chromebook. So it allows you to like put in additional security controls, or you can enforce policies that your schools would like to follow, or like in some instances, some schools allow their students to purchase the Chromebook directly, and then they just have them install the Chrome Education license. And the school, even when, like the student is working um, at home or like studying from home, the school can still enforce uh, like their policies on the Chromebook. So let's say it's a personal Chromebook, but it has a Chrome Education license tied to the school. The school could actually opt, to like lock the Chromebook to follow the school uh, policies from, let's say, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then after 3 p.m., the Chromebook reverts back to a consumer device. And then the next day, the policies get automatically enforced again. So, and that's why, like using Chromebooks is very easy because like even if you have like thousands of Chromebooks for your schools, it's very easy for the IT admin to manage all the Chromebooks. And like managing the inventory is also easy. So let's say for example you want to do like your school purchases Chromebooks and you want to do a loaner program for the Chromebook. And let's say this person who borrowed the Chromebook has not returned the Chromebook after the deadline. You as the IT administrator can like just simply lock the Chromebook, and surely it will find its way back to you, because a device that cannot be used by somebody, it has no use for them, so they will return it. Okay. And something that you need to consider also is teacher training. So we know that for a lot of teachers, just switching to distance learning is not an easy thing to do. So at Google, we've actually created a lot of content for educators, and we have a channel under YouTube. Just search for Google for Education, and we have a lot of, like playlists there. Or you could actually, if you prefer to learn from your co-Filipino teachers, you could just go to GEG program on YouTube, and we have a lot of like content made there by Filipino teachers. And we have some of it in the Google for Education channel also. But if you want to do it like a bit more formally and do it module from module, just search for Google Teacher Center. So that's where all our resources are related to Google for Education are available. So mainly what we're providing for you as educators is a toolkit. We have the Google Teacher Center, and this is where I think you should start taking notes so that you can search after this webinar. Just go to the Google Teacher Center, just search for that. If you're like a university, college, or a school, and you want to deploy G Suite for Education, just go search G Suite for Education, and you'll see the different features that it has and how to sign up. If you want to sign up, just search for G Suite for Education sign up. Or you can also read up more about Chromebooks. One thing that you could, join and continually learn from is also our educator communities. Just search for Google Educator Groups or contact Lynette. She will know where to find all the Google Educators groups are across the Philippines. And if you have any, thoughts, any questions, the easiest way to get an immediate answer is to use, of course, Google search. So you could just search if you have like a certain issue that you're stuck with, just do a search. More often than not, there's an answer to your question on Google search. And finally, of course, we've been sharing a lot of best practices. And like when you go to the Google Teacher Center, there's a lot of, case studies that can be found there. And, just also like poke around online and you'll see a lot of sharings that schools, universities have been providing so that other schools may learn from them. And then let's just review again the different resources that you can go to. One is the Google Teacher Center. So if there's something that you should remember and keep at heart after this webinar, it's the Google Teacher Center. Or easily, you can just go to teachfromhome.google. That's like a site that we created specifically to learn how to do distance learning. And on YouTube, I call it personally YouTube Academy, because from YouTube, I learned so many things in the last few weeks. I actually learned how to bake bread. I've learned how to plant scraps from the kitchen, and many, many things that you can learn from. And then, of course, there's the keyword blog that you can read through for updates on what we have new in Google for Education. You could actually also sign up for Google for Education newsletter. And then finally, like here's a link you could write down also, gg.gg/GSFE Webinars 2020. So this is the webinars that our communities and partners in the Philippines have been running since early April to help teachers learn how to do distance learning. So there's certainly a lot of support available for you, like easily, like even without leaving your home, you could actually learn how to do distance learning. And our teachers in the Philippines have been sharing a lot of best practices on what they have been doing to engage their students continuously. All right. So recently, we announced that we have made some of the premium features of G Suite Enterprise for Education available for everyone using G Suite for Education. So you could, like using Google Meets, you can reach up to 250 people. So if your own, division or your own unit, you could actually run uh, like this larger training sessions for your people. And then you can also do a live stream of up to 100,000 viewers within your domain. So if you're a really, really large school, and I know one school in the Philippines, I think they have about 80,000 students, they could do this live stream within their G Suite for Education account. And finally, like something that's of real value for a lot of educators is the ability to actually record meetings and save them to Google Drive. So I do that a lot because I train a lot of people at work, and sometimes it's repetitive, right? So you could just simply record it and then save it to your Google Drive. And if they ask questions, just send them the link, to the session that you've actually run. All right. Now we can do question and answer. And I hope you guys learned and picked up a couple of things from this webinar today.
Okay, so thank you, Miss Aileen, for that very engaging and motivational lecture about G Suite. And on a personal note, very beneficial talaga ang G Suite because in Schedule 1, we are using this prior and during the ECQ. And we love the paperless setup and we get to collaborate in time. Again, thank you, Miss Aileen. And now, we will entertain ilang questions. 10 questions.
Ang
Okay.
dami. Sana hindi mahirap, di ba? Okay, game.
Okay, Mel. From Juan Vivillarin, how can these effective online platforms ensure that our students answer the assessments we provided independently and meaningfully?
Okay, thank you so much for a very interesting question. I think like the best way to ensure that your students like respond to your assessments is you need to be clear for them from the beginning how they're actually going to be assessed. Diba? So like when you go to a class in the beginning of the school year, usually your professor would tell you, okay, this is the breakdown of your grades. So that it's clear for the student that when you give your homework or assessment that they need to complete it so that they know which part of the grade it will actually fit into. So wag naman tayo siguro trigger happy sa pagbigay ng maraming assessment, di ba? Let's be, proactive in sharing your goal to your students so that they understand how they're gonna be assessed for this specific class, and so that when you give, your assessments, may it be a pop quiz or may it be some collaborative homework that they need to do, they understand how it actually funnels in to their grades.
Yes, thank you, Miss Eileen. Another question from Juvie Manzano. Good morning, Ma'am Eileen. Thank you very much for that informative lecture. My question is that how to prevent cheating on Google Form quiz?
So Google Form Quiz actually has. Thank you so much for that. Like very practical question. So Google Form Quiz actually has a randomizer. So you could actually turn that on so that when the students receive the questions, it randomizes. Plus, um, like if you're using Chromebooks, you could actually like lock, the Chromebook to be able to access only the quiz. So my suggestion for you is like running pop quizzes or things, just make it straightforward, and you could actually put in a timer also for the quiz.
Okay. So another question. Okay. So from Ma'am Jo, about Chromebooks, if there will be a license, how can we or our students afford? Since in reality, our resources or funds are limited. Are there any partnership we can avail? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that question about how do you actually acquire Chromebooks. So currently we're actually in talks with a couple of our partners in the Philippines to see how the Chromebooks can actually be made more available. So I've actually given them a wish list to make it easier for users to acquire these devices. So Chromebooks are like, it's much more inexpensive compared to other devices. But of course, it's important for those OEMs, distributors, and resellers of hardware to make it more affordable for you. Alternatively, what you could actually do is also try to work out with the bank to um, create a means for, if for example you're purchasing as a school, or if you'd like to allow lecturers or students to purchase Chromebooks, you could actually have the school work out something with a bank, and then the bank takes care of paying the distributor or the hardware reseller for the Chromebooks and the licensing.
Another question from Miss Elizalde Berba. Good morning, ma'am. What plans does Google have for Google Meet after September 2020? All users utilizing Google Meet now might be left hanging when all are already use it. So, what would
So Google Meet is not going away. The only thing that will happen after September 20 is from 250 participants, it will revert to 100 participants. And of course, the recording function will be turned off. Alternatively, what your school can consider is to sign up for G Suite Enterprise for Education. So like for those universities who would like to continue using it, and so far what we're seeing is there's a number of universities who are already signing up for G Suite Enterprise for Education so that they can continue using the premium features. But just to be clear, for the free version of G Suite Enterprise, G Suite for Education, you could go on using Google Meets. It's just that it's going to be limited to 100 participants.
another question from Peter Abrenica. I've been sending questions to my students through our group chat for their quizzes. But the question is, how are we going to manage students having the same answers for they just get their answers from the Google?
I think, thank you so much for your question. I think the this is dependent mainly on how you actually ask your questions. So, if for example your questions is more thought provoking, then you'd expect the students to submit like more original questions. So, it's important for you as the educator to provide like questions that cannot just be easily searched on Google. So that's something that you can do, or like be very clear on what your goal is for actually running, that quiz for your students. Like, be clear about what kind of assessment you're doing for the students. So, because there are some questions, like when you ask, you would expect the answers would mostly be the same coming from the students. So that's the reason why I suggest that, like when you treat distance learning, like it should be a bit different from how you're doing your lectures in class. And what I suggest you do is like just also watch some of the like best practice sharing of other teachers so that you can learn from them and like understand better how you should engage your students as you do your assessments.
So a question from Mr. Rodney. Thank you, very informative lecture. Me and my faculty members are already using Google Classroom for almost 2 years now, and our students are really appreciating it. When creating quizzes, one way to avoid sharing of answers between students is putting a time limit for the students and adjusting the settings to randomize the questions. Can also Google create an option to put a time for each question instead of a time limit for the whole test? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that suggestion. This is a great practical approach to things. What I think you could do is for this suggestion. So for each product that we have, we actually have a feedback form at the bottom right, normally of each product that you use. I suggest you submit it as a suggestion to include in Google Classroom so that our engineering team can see. And usually, when it's um, a, like a feature request that many other like teachers or educators submit, they consider and integrate it into the future roadmap of Google Classroom.
From Miss Nova 30, the challenge is the faculty in charge has to be fluent first in managing the G Suite. Thank you. Are there tutorial websites on how to navigate all this? I think nasagot na kanina ni Miss Aileen to during her
Google
lecture.
Teacher Center. It's always good to review what resources you have. So I strongly suggest to just search for Google Teacher Center. And for those who want to learn quickly, you just also go teachfromhome.google.
Okay. From Age Miss Angel, can it automatically do plagiarism check with students' work?
One of the things that we have in G Suite for Education is originality reports. So this is something that we launched last year. So if you're using the free version of G Suite for Education, you could actually test some instances using originality reports. But if you have a G Suite Enterprise for Education deployment, you could actually use originality reports unlimitedly.
Okay, from Mr. Romel, since the smartphone is almost available to all, is there a way to simulate the operation of a Chromebook so that students can use their smartphones as a Chromebook-like device, maybe an app?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you for asking that. Of course, like all the apps that we have on G Suite for Education is available for Android. So if your students just use Android phones or even tablets, they could just download the app. So like one apps normally downloaded by students is also Google Classroom or Google Drive. And you could actually operationalize and use your phones even. Um, to do all these things. And another part that you can do also is a lot of educators also use apps from the Chrome Web Store or Google Play that they share with their students. So that's another thing that you can use also, apart from just all the Google for Education apps that are available, all the Chrome Web Store and Google Play. And there are many education apps in the marketplace that you can use.
Yes, another question from Fides Bernardo. Is there a feature where everything is summarized, like scores, grades, appearing like a class record?
Teka, check ko lang. Alam ko meron. Class record. So, yeah, certainly, like, there's a way now for you to record all the grades of your students using Google Classroom. But apart from, what we have on Google, I suggest you also check out the different apps developed by developers on the Chrome Web Store and Google Play. There's always something out there that you can use to um, do more for recording grades of your students.
Another question from Miss Sheila. Thank you for a very informative session. May we ask if you have suggestion on how we can use G Suite for education for assessing the skills of the students?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question, Sheila. One of the easier ways to assess students is you can use Google Forms for quizzes. And like I mentioned this earlier during the lecture. And certainly depending on how you want to assess your students, there are other means that you can use. So like if for example you want them to create presentations, then you can use Google Slides. If it's more of like related to math or statistics, then you can use spreadsheet to assess your students. And like you can also go beyond, just what's available on G Suite for Education and combine many different tools based on how you want to actually assess your students.
So another question from Ray. One way that I can think to prevent cheating is restricting the ability to take screenshot using the apps. Can taking screenshots be restricted?
Thank you for your question. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Kay. Thank you for your question. I think ability to be able to restrict screenshots is something that you can enforce when you're using Chromebooks. But I strongly suggest you submit this feature request also to the Chrome team. So you can suggest that so that it's something that they can take into consideration as they update features for Google Chrome.
So the last question from Mr. JP. Special education naman to. Good morning, ma'am. How would you introduce this platform in easier way, especially to SPED students? We all know that students have short temper in learning this kind of platform.
I think the students actually learn. Thank you so much for your question, JP. To be honest, I think like the students, like when they encounter using Suite for Education, it's something that's very like easy for them. So the generations that we have today, using like apps and like online platforms is something that's very easy for them to understand. I think what you need to support more actually are the parents, because it's the parents who would struggle more as they support their children. So, and as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, I think it's important for you as an educator to figure out how to make things more interesting for students, and like to note that the students today they learn very differently from how, like, well, my generation used to learn. My generation was Very straightforward. You have your books, your teachers give you homework, you have your regular exams, long quizzes every single quarter. But the students today, and this I learned from my son, they prefer to learn very differently from how we used to learn. And I really had a hard time, understanding that. So my son even had to transfer several schools before he actually finished his university studies because he said like, well, it wasn't too interesting for me. So until eventually I found a school which he found more useful for his learning. So that's something I think that all of us as educators need to understand is that students learn very differently today, and all the tools that we provide at Google is a means for you to utilize as the platform to, reach out and engage your students to continue learning.
And for the last question, last na talaga, Miss Eileen. Mahani Christine, how can we be a Google certified educator?
Oh, thank you so much for asking this question, honey. I've been waiting for this question. So, how can you be a Google educator? So, at Google, apart from when you go to the Google Teacher Center, you could actually check out the different certifications that we have. So, if it's something that you think you'd like to understand, if you already know enough, or like let's say your university or your school would like to ensure that all their professors and lecturers have the ability to do distance learning, then you can certainly like encourage them to take the Google certified educator certifications. So we actually have four certifications for educator. You start at certified educator level 1, and then there's certified educator level 2, and then for those who are a bit more adventurous, they can become Google certified trainers, or those who would like to uh, join and learn much more, they can apply to become a Google certified innovator. um, and on the other hand, for IT administrators, we also have the IT admin exam for G Suite for IT admins. And if you'd like, your students to also take the certifications, we have the G Suite certifications available for use for students. And they could use this as a way who add in their resume as they graduate. So I've worked with a couple of universities who have been teaching pre-service teachers, and they've been having their students take the Google certified educator exams, and it's been a good add-on for students to experience using this and learn to use all these tools even before they graduate and become teachers, because like the reality is, like this is our new normal, and like having your students learn how to use all these tools will certainly go a long way as they join the workforce eventually. So Google Teacher Center, and then look for the section for certifications. That's how you can become a Google certified educator.
Ayan. And so comments, lots of inputs here, questions raised and being answered by the speaker. Provide me the necessary information. This helps a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Miss
Thank
I.
you, Jimmy. If you
Um,
have more comments, please like ping me on Twitter. Just search for Eileen Apollo, and you can just share any additional information to me, so you can get in touch with Chad. Ping niyo si Lynette. She knows how to find me.
and another comment. thanks the information coming from the two equally beautiful and intelligent. Ay, si Ma'am Aileen lang po yun. More of this, somehow it feeds and relaxes our mind brought by this lockdown. More power, Ched Region 1 from Mandaluyong City. Wow!
Thank you, si Screenshot ko siya.
Add po sa sinabi ni Miss Eileen, as Google certified innovator po, very life-changing experience siya. And marami akong natulungan na teachers through free seminars kasi ang itinuro ni Miss Eileen as a mentor is to serve people and to serve the educators and the education sector. Ginagamit namin ng hashtag, ano ulit yon Miss Eileen? Hashtag para
Para
sa
sa bayan.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Miss Eileen, for that very motivating, very engaging GSuite session. Maraming maraming salamat po. Any last message for our educators po?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chad Region 1, for inviting me today. I hope this session was very useful for you. And just a word, for all educators out there who are, learning how to do distance learning. I know it might be hard for you, but just always remember that you're doing it for your students, and like, who knows, someday your students will find their the best footing that they have through you as the educator. And I read the other day, one of my educator friends shared that, you know teaching is the only profession that teaches all other professions. So it's certainly a huge, like, burden on your shoulders, but just always remember, kayo yung gagawa nito para sa bayan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Miss Eileen. So, hopefully, marami pong natutunan ng aming mga educators and viewers ngayon. And we expect na makikita ka namin ulit sa aming susunod na webinar. And announcement lang po, plugging lang. So please follow, subscribe to our official YouTube channel, CHED Regional Office 1. I-search nyo lang po yan sa YouTube. And please like and follow our Facebook page, CHED Region 1 po yon. And itong pinakahihintay natin. And for your e-certificate, the feedback form link will be published later after the second webinar or the second topic this day. Me and Mr. Elvin Kasem will discuss GSuite for Education Quick Start IT Setup Guide. So, I invite yung mga IT admin na manood ng session na to, yung mga nag-handle ng mga IT resources sa mga schools nila. This is for you kasi tutulungan namin kayo or tuturuan namin kayo on how to set up G Suite for Education. Step by step ituturo po namin yan. And then, may upcoming project ang CHED Regional Office 1. And yes, we will help the higher education institutions in Region 1 po to have a G Suite for Education. Para po yan sa mga Region 1 HEIs natin. So, e-certificate, abangan po natin yung feedback form link mamaya. Our session will be 1 p.m. So, ininyan po namin kayo or invite namin kayo na manood po ulit ng aming session. Again, thank you, Miss Eileen. Thank you. Yan, maraming salamat po. And, yan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye po. Thank you so much, our FB and YouTube viewers. Thank you so much po.